It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday. The sun was out, the water was crystal clear, and I had just finished cleaning the pool for some peaceful alone time. But then I heard the gate click open. I wasn't expecting anyone. No texts, no calls, and definitely no guests. That's when I looked out the window, and there they were. The infamous HOA Karen sisters in full matching sun hats and heels, walking straight into my backyard like they owned the place. One had a clipboard, the other had a speaker in her hand. They didn't even look around, just kicked off their shoes and made themselves right at home in my pool. Now for context, these aren't just any neighbors. These are the HOA board members who fined people for leaving trash cans out 5 minutes too long, sent letters over lawn heights, and even knocked on doors to count the number of cars in driveways. I've had my fair share of disagreements with them, but nothing this bold. They claimed the pool was technically community space, even though I live on a private lot with a locked gate, clearly marked private property. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they were confused, but nope, when I told them to leave, they waved me off like I was the one intruding. That's when I decided I wasn't going to argue. I simply walked over, shut the gate, and locked it. Let's just say things got interesting real quick. Phones were pulled out, threats were made, and within minutes, I was calling the police for trespassing. But what happened next? That was the real twist. You won't believe how the Karen sisters reacted once the cops showed up when what the officers discovered just might flip the whole situation on its head. So while the Karen sisters paced around my backyard like they were on some HOA power trip, I stayed calm and just waited near the gate. They shouted things like, "This is part of the shared community resources, and you're going to regret this." I didn't argue, because honestly, there was no point. My pool is clearly within my fenced property, and it's not even listed in any community bylaws. I've lived here for years, and never once has it been mentioned as common space. But somehow, these two decided that today was the day to stake their claim. When the police arrived, things escalated fast. The sisters rushed to the officers first, painting a picture like I had locked them out of their own amenities. I could see them throwing in HOA terms and puffing up their story. But when the officer looked at me and I calmly pointed to the private property, no trespassing sign right next to the gate, his expression changed. He asked to see my deed and boundary paperwork, which I had already printed out during a previous run-in with the HOA. I handed it over without saying much. He nodded and walked back to them. Now here's where it started getting weird. One of the officers quietly pulled me aside and asked if I had noticed anything off about the way they got in. Turns out, when they reviewed the gate, the latch looked like it had been tampered with, scratched, slightly bent, like someone had forced it. That changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about entitled neighbors taking a dip. It was starting to look more serious. The officer called in for a quick property check, and as they started walking around the edge of the yard, something behind the bushes near my tool shed caught their attention. That's when things really took a turn. One of the officers motioned for me to stay back as they moved toward the shed. I hadn't been back there in a while. It's mostly where I keep old pool equipment and a couple of gardening tools. But as soon as they got closer, I saw both of them freeze. One of the Karen sisters tried to follow, but the officer held out his hand and told her to stay put. That's when I saw it too. A small pile of unfamiliar items shoved behind the bushes. Folded towels, bottled water, a Bluetooth speaker, and a key spare gate key wrapped in a plastic bag. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't moved that key in weeks, and I'd only ever told one person where it was. But here it was, clearly dug up and used. When the officer asked how long it had been missing, I told him I honestly didn't even realize it was missing until now. That's when the second officer quietly asked if I had security cameras. I did two facing the yard, one near the gate. He asked for access, and I nodded, already pulling out my phone to cue up the footage. Meanwhile, the Karen sisters had completely changed their tone. Gone was the bossy HOA attitude. Now they were whispering to each other, looking nervously. At the shed, one of them even said, "We were just making sure everything was up to code." Like that was a reasonable excuse to sneak into someone's backyard and bring a picnic setup. The footage started playing. The screen showed them slipping into my yard the night before, using the spare key like it was their own. They had clearly planned this out: pool floaties, snacks, even a bottle of sunscreen. They knew exactly where the key was hidden. And from the way they acted, this wasn't the first time. But just as the officer leaned in closer to the screen, something even more unexpected came into frame: someone else stepping through the gate behind them. Someone I hadn't seen in years. I leaned in closer, barely believing what I was seeing. The video clearly showed the Karen sisters slipping through the gate late at night, laughing like it was some kind of secret adventure. But just seconds after they entered, another figure appeared in the footage. At first, it was hard to make out. The shadows near the gate made it grainy, but as the person stepped closer to the porch light, my heart nearly stopped. It was Greg, my old neighbor who had moved away over a year ago after a messy fight with the HOA. I hadn't seen or heard from him since, and last I knew, he was living 2 cities over. The officers paused the footage and exchanged looks. One of them asked, "Do you know this man?" I nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of it. Greg used to be close with the Karen sisters, especially Denise, the one always carrying around the HOA binder like it was sacred law. But after a huge dispute over a permit for his deck, he'd vanished, no forwarding address, no goodbyes. And now, here he was, caught on my security footage, sneaking into my yard in the middle of the night with 2 HOA board members. The officers didn't say much, but I could tell something about the footage raised a flag. One of them made a quick call on his radio, and I heard him quietly ask for a unit to check the nearby cul-de-sac. The other officer asked if Greg had any reason to be in the area, or if I'd noticed anything missing lately. I hadn't, but now I was second-guessing everything. Meanwhile, the Karen sisters were starting to panic. Denise kept pacing and muttering something about misunderstandings, while her sister sat down by the pool, avoiding everyone's eyes. The energy had shifted. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. There was something bigger underneath. Something they clearly didn't want the police to find out. And whatever it was about to come to the surface, just as the tension was hitting its peak. One of the officers stepped aside to answer his radio. His voice turned serious, low, and clipped. The other officer stayed with us, eyes shifting between the Karen sisters and the paused footage on my phone. Denise looked like she was about to say something, but her sister shot her a warning glance. That silent exchange told me more than anything they were hiding something. And it wasn't just about sneaking into my pool. Then the officer returned and said, "We have a situation. There's been a report of a break-in 2 blocks from here. The homeowner says they caught someone on their ring cam matches the guy in your footage." My heart dropped. This wasn't just some neighborhood prank or power grab anymore. Greg wasn't just tagging along for a swim. He was being actively looked for. And the Karen sisters had brought him into my yard. One of the officers turned back to me and asked, "Do you know if this man still has access to your property?" I shook my head, but my mind was racing. If he had the spare key, if he knew about the layout, he could have come back even without the sisters. Worse, what if he already had? Suddenly, from inside the house, I heard something fall. A sharp clatter, like metal hitting tile. All of us turned. The officers motioned for everyone to stay put and unholstered their flashlights as they moved toward the door. I followed a few steps behind, heart pounding. I hadn't left anything out. and I knew I locked the back door after hearing the gate click earlier. The Karen sisters were frozen now. No more smug looks, no more excuses. Just quiet panic. Inside, one of the officers stepped slowly into the hallway and called out, "Anyone there?" The only sound was the soft hum of the AC. Then another noise, a creak on the stairs. Someone was still in the house. The officer moved fast, stepping into the hallway with his hand near his holster, flashlight cutting through the dim light. I stayed just behind him, heart pounding in my ears. Another creak on the stairs. Then a shadow moved. The officer raised his voice, firm but calm. "Come out slowly, hands where I can see them." A few tense seconds passed. Then Greg stepped into views, sweaty, nervous, and holding a crowbar in one hand. The same man from the security footage, the same guy who'd vanished over a year ago, now standing at the top of my stairs like he belonged there. The officer repeated his command, and thankfully, Greg dropped the crowbar and raised his hands. The other officer cuffed him without a word as he kept glancing toward the backyard, almost like he was checking if the sisters were still there. I turned and looked out the window. Denise and her sister hadn't moved. They both stood frozen. Watching everything unfold, the officers brought Greg out through the front, and just as they were putting him in the car, he said something that stopped me cold. "They told me you were on vacation." It hit me. The Karen sisters didn't just let him in, they planned it. They thought I wouldn't be home. That's why they looked so shocked when I locked the gate. They weren't there for a dip in the pool, they were covering for him. Maybe it was favors, blackmail, or some twisted arrangement from their past dealings. Whatever it was, it went deeper than anyone expected. The officers turned their attention to the sisters. Their smirks were gone, replaced by panic and silence. And just when I thought it was all over, one of the officers walked back up and handed me a small black device. "We found this tucked behind your living room shelf," he said. "It's a hidden camera." That's when I realized Greg wasn't just trespassing. He'd been watching. The moment I held that hidden camera in my hand, everything made sense. The odd things I'd noticed over the past few weeks, the slight shift in furniture. The gate mysteriously unlocked one morning, even my dog acting strange near the living room shelf. Greg hadn't just broken in to snoop, he'd been watching me, waiting for the right moment. And with the Karen sisters helping him get in, they were clearly more involved than they ever admitted. Once the officers realized that, they took both sisters in for questioning. No more HOA excuses, no more lectures about community standards. Just silence. It turned out Greg had been squatting not far from the neighborhood, bouncing between empty rentals and getting help from people who still held grudges against the HOA. Denise and her sister, still bitter over losing power on the board after several complaints, had been quietly helping him, maybe out of spite, or maybe for something in return. Either way, they were caught red-handed, trespassing, aiding a break-in, and knowingly hiding surveillance on private property. In the days that followed, neighbors started reaching out. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd had odd encounters with the sisters. Some had caught them snooping. Others had strange finds suddenly disappear. The whole situation cracked open something bigger about how they had been running things for years. I replaced all the locks, added extra cameras, and, for the first time in a long time, felt safe in my own home again. The pool, still private, still peaceful, and, now, finally respected. This whole experience was a reminder that boundaries matter, no matter who thinks they're above them. In the end, the truth came out, and this time, the HOA Karens picked the wrong gate to walk through.